So a few months back, I wrote, recorded, and edited a video about the first book in the forgotten 90s horror book series, Five Nights at Freddy's. But in some weird, strange glitch, it seems that the video has been removed from MeTube and I can't find it anywhere on my page anymore. And I've been in contact with MeTube support, which as you guys all know is always very responsive and helpful. And I would be more upset about the situation, but honestly, my Thomas the Murderer video is doing so well that I didn't really need this 5NAF video to do that well. But despite all of this, I figured that I'd just soldier on and make a video about the second book in the series, simply titled Five Nights at Freddy's 2. 5NAF 2 is a very strange scenario because already the author of the series, Jeremy Fitzgerald, was pretty much at the end of his rope when it came to creating this series. The first book was not a huge success, and at the time a lot of reviews thought that it was too extreme for a children's story. And to be fair, they kind of had a point. The first novel contained the deaths of 4 children, 3 at the hand of a serial killer, including our main protagonist, with one of the kids dying by being skewered by an animatronic suit. At the time, animatronics were mostly associated with Fleischerland and the rides based on their popular animated movies like Rumpelstiltskin, The Hare and the Hedgehog, and The Wedding of Mrs. Fox. So to see these animatronics used as an instrument to murder children was pretty jarring and caused kind of a stir in a few readers that read the first book. So naturally, Jeremy Fitzgerald decided to double down. 5NAF 2 is a stranger, messier, and more adult look at the series. Instead of feeling like a children's dark mystery romp akin to the Scoop Boys like the first book did, this one feels a lot more eerie and plays out more like a character drama. The book essentially has 2 main storylines, but the first one follows Evan, who is the only surviving member of the friend group from the first book, who gets a job working as the night janitor for Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria. I'm going to do a little bit of a recap to get you all up to speed. You can think about it like the classic earlier on segment that you get at the beginning of a chapter of a television program. The first book and this book takes place in Twister, Utah, which I just found out is pronounced Twister for some reason, like with the emphasis on the stir. But anyway, the book follows 3 friends in grade 5 of primary school, David, Evan, and Henry. Their other friend, William, went missing a few weeks before the start of the first book. The boys found out that William said he had seen the infamous yellow bear before he disappeared. This yellow bear is an urban legend of a rumored 5th animatronic at the closed down pizzeria that David's dad is working to clean up. The pizzeria was a popular location for kids to play pinball and see the animatronics perform and wander around, but it was closed down in 1983 under mysterious circumstances. David's dad has been hired by a mysterious phone guy to clean up the place, and he, David, and David's older brother Gregory live in a small house behind the pizzeria. For 5 nights, Greg visits the pizzeria and various spooky things occur. First, David is scared by his older brother Gregory, who is wearing one of the animatronics as a suit. The animatronics have a crank in the back that can be turned in order to shift all of the mechanical insides to the edges or outside of the suit, allowing somebody to wear them like a costume. On the second night, David is scared by another one of the animatronics that he assumes his brother is piloting, only to realize that his brother was not the one inside the suit. On the third night, Gregory, again the older brother, is tasked with moving the suit of Chica the chicken, and while moving it back to the storage room, he hears laughter. He gets inside the suit to move it faster, but there has been dripping water from the ceiling which causes all of the mechanical parts to shoot back into the center of the suit, essentially skewering Gregory and killing him. On the fourth night, David, Evan, and Henry have this awesome sleepover at the pizzeria where they play pinball all night, but are scared by several more of the animatronics. The robots chase them out of the pizzeria, shattering the back door. David's dad is furious and takes Evan home in his car, making Henry walk home since he lives nearby. Around the same time as all this is going on, the boys' Freddy Fazbear-obsessed and mean-spirited teacher, Mr. Patrick, is arrested under suspicion of being the cause of William's disappearance. If you remember, William is the 4th friend of the friend group, the one who went missing before the start of the novel. I'm just realizing now that the events in this book sound like eerily similar to Weirder Ways on Blockflix. And I'm not saying that the creators of that program stole the idea from 5NAF, but kind of seems like they stole the idea from 5NAF. But anyways, Mr. Patrick is arrested, but then threatens to sue the police station over the unfair treatment that he received at the hands of the police. This will all come back later. On the final night, the 5th night, the yellow bear appears at David's window and tells him that he knows where his friends are. David, thinking that Yellow Bear is Mr. Patrick in a costume, gets his slingshot and follows him. Yellow Bear leads David to the back room of the pizzeria where we learn that William and now Henry have been stuffed inside the robot suits, having been killed by Yellow Bear. Now, with every suit except for one filled with the rotting corpse of a child, Yellow Bear removes his mask, revealing himself to be a complete stranger who simply says, "It's me." The book ends with David being stuffed into the final suit by our mysterious killer. It's a downer ending to a story that ended up being far more gruesome than anybody expected. But now that we're caught up with the story of the first book, let's move on to my summary and analysis of the second book, Five Nights at Freddy's 2. This book is structured in 3 major portions with a prologue before them. If you'll remember, the first book started with a very short and minimalistic depiction of William being killed by Yellow Bear. This book, by contrast, starts with a longer prologue that starts with the perspective of 2 children so as to recreate the style of the first, before transitioning to something darker. There are extra bits of expository information that are strewn throughout the rest of the story, very similar to the way that Richard Bachman writes. And these extra bits add on to the prologue, but I'm going to present all of those bits already assembled for my retelling of the story to make things simpler. Essentially, we start with 2 best friends, Michael and Nestor. The year is 1983 and both kids live in Twister, Utah. Michael and Nestor are best friends due to the fact that they live close to each other and also both have neglectful and alcoholic parents. It's honestly a pretty depressing opening to the story. I guess I should clarify the story does not specifically say that they are alcoholic, but it heavily implies it. I don't know why they have to imply that they're alcoholic, but they can talk about the explicit murder of these kids. It's a very weird system they have going on here. Despite the terrible circumstances, Nestor and Michael are very close with one another, and Michael especially spends a lot of time at Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria. Michael is obsessed with the pinball machines and also has a fondness for the animatronics, but Nestor, however, is terrified of them. This puts a damper on their friendship since Michael wants to be constantly spending time at the pizzeria to stay away from his dad, but Nestor isn't always willing to go. One night, Michael steals a key from a security guard and wakes Nestor up by knocking on his window and telling him that tonight is the night that he is going to get over his fear of the robots. The 2 boys sneak into the pizzeria and find that the Freddy Fazbear animatronic is still out on stage. The 2 boys approach the inert animatronic and Nestor sees that it's not that scary. The boys start to get all excited and kind of slap happy, and they start messing around with the animatronic. They see that Freddy's jaw is hanging wide open, and Michael tells Nestor to give him a boost so he can do something funny. Nestor felt Michael's dirty shoes on his shoulders, both of the boys using the tall animatronic as a support for their shaky human tower. Because of the way they were stacked, Nestor couldn't see what Michael was up to, but the boys were so giddy from the fun that they'd been having up to that point that he didn't care. Like always, Nestor would cheer Michael on as Michael had done for him countless times. After all, that's what best friends were for. Nestor heard Michael's voice coming from above him, sounding slightly muffled. "Oh no, Nestor! Freddy is going to eat me alive!" A loud crunching sound filled the room. Nestor fell backward by instinct, expecting a furious Michael to come tumbling to the ground, angry that his support had fallen out from under him so suddenly. But Michael didn't fall to the ground. His body hung limp from the jaws of the animatronic. Nestor looked up in horror, completely stunned, unable to even call out for his entire world now dangling in front of him. He waited for panic to replace the stunned silence, but it never did. So in case it wasn't clear, Michael was just killed by the animatronic due to its metal jaws snapping shut around his head. Absolutely terrifying. This is where the initial prologue ends, but we are given more context throughout the rest of the novel that fills in some of the loose ends as best as it can. We learn that Nestor ends up running home, but is completely unable to talk, and again, his parents aren't very responsive towards him, and it seems like his response to what he's just witnessed is to completely shut down. And because his parents nor Michael's dad are responsible, none of them bother to question why Michael isn't in his bed the following morning. Nestor runs back before Freddy Fazbear's opens to go help his friend, but Michael is gone by that point, which will come back later. Eventually, a neighbor notices that Michael is missing and reports this to the police, who immediately suspect his dad. His dad, learning that he is suspected, flees. Nestor never hears about whether the police ever caught Michael's dad, and Michael's body never shows up. There is a detail that I probably should have mentioned earlier because it does come back up, but it's that Michael is constantly wearing a very specific multicolored propeller beanie with the propeller torn off. It's a weird detail that reminded me of an old Berkeley and Bentham comic strip where Berkeley orders a propeller beanie that ends up exceeding even his wildest expectations. In this book, again, the beanie does come back later, and I'm guessing that the whole propeller torn off thing is attempting to symbolize Michael having his wings clipped by his sad upbringing. But anyways, Michael's body is never found, and the pizzeria is closed down for unrelated reasons, most likely financial woes by the owner. Nestor's traumatic history with the pizzeria and the horrors that he witnessed the night of the fateful bite of 1983 end up forming a bizarre obsession with the pizzeria as a whole. When I was originally reading the prologue, I figured that it might be giving us the backstory for the Yellow Bear serial killer from the first book, but that's actually not the case. We learn that Nestor's last name is actually Patrick. That means that he is Mr. Patrick, the mean grade 5 instructor for the boys in the first book. It's an interesting move to give Mr. Patrick's obsession with Freddy Fazbear, something that was played entirely for laughs in the first book, a tragic backstory. But Mr. Patrick is going to become a much more important character in this book, so it makes sense to set him up in this way, although it still is like a strange choice for a children's novel. Like I said though, this book seems to have been written rather spitefully by the author, so that can explain why it's so much darker and less kid-friendly than even the controversial first book. It's interesting how it almost foreshadowed the trend of modern horror video game series like Goosebumps, which started out as very child-friendly and is now getting more and more disturbing. But also that might just have something to do with R.L. Stine handing the series over to Brillo Brush Interactive. Let's finish out the prologue though. We learned that the pizzeria was shuttered because it was never profitable in the first place, and that is like the actual reason it was shut down. I think it might have been a little bit of a missed opportunity to not have some sort of like horrifying event, like a child's head being chomped by an animatronic, be the cause of the shuttering. But also, if something like that did happen, then there would probably be a lot more eyes in the pizzeria rather than it just like sitting and rotting like it had at the time of the first book. But with that, we have the end of the prologue, so let's move on to the first official section of the book. Part 1, Mr. Patrick's Pizzeria. Part 1 opens with Mr. Patrick on the phone with the person who previously owned the pizzeria, and we learn a few very important things. The first is that Mr. Patrick won his settlement against the local police and has gotten a fat stack of cash that he has now used to buy Freddy Fazbear's. The second is that the previous owner is a real estate magnate that literally forgot the place existed and definitely did not hire David's dad to clean it up. This all but tells us that David's dad was hired by the Yellow Bear serial killer, since the killer seemed to have a key to the pizzeria on him as well. We also learn that the animatronics from the first book, Chica, Bonnie, Foxy, and Freddy, are not at the pizzeria anymore, which is why Mr. Patrick is furious with the previous owner. So while the pizzeria still has all of its pinball machines, the titular Freddy Fazbear is nowhere to be found, leading Mr. Patrick to call the place Mr. Patrick's Pizzeria. Unable to track down any authentic Freddy Fazbear's animatronics, Mr. Patrick is forced to order a new set of robots that don't have the spring lock functions of the old ones. He is pretty bummed about this, but honestly those spring locks are responsible for far too many child deaths, so I think it's actually a pretty good scenario for him, all things considered. The new animatronics are Happy Frog, Mr. Hippo, Pig Patch, Orville Elephant, and Ned Bear, which is just a straight ripoff of Freddy Fazbear. While you might expect some kind of hijinks or shenanigans with these new robots, they're not possessed like the previous crew, so they're actually pretty boring. But that's also kind of the point. The pizzeria is failing, it has no recognizable branding, it's owned by a Freddy Fazbear's obsessed guy but has no Freddy Fazbear in it at all. Mr. Patrick also lives in the house that David used to live in, since it comes with the property. David and his family disappeared suddenly, and the police investigated the house before locking it up back up again, and Mr. Patrick remarks that it looked pretty well taken care of when he moved in. During his first few nights at the house, he thought he heard muffled sounds coming from the walls and swore he could hear someone walking around behind the house at night. Mr. Patrick chalks this up to some animals coming out of the nearby woods that are behind the property, but then things start to get a little strange. He finds tracks in the mud outside of the window of his bedroom, and at first he thinks they're from an animal, but he says the shape is off and they don't look entirely natural. He goes back inside and looks through the boxes of Freddy Fazbear memorabilia that he has and finds an old picture of the animatronics. He identifies the footprints outside of his window as coming from the Freddy animatronic. It's at this point that we see just how messed up Mr. Patrick is. He has been carrying the weight of the guilt of causing Michael's death for over a decade at this point. He becomes convinced that Freddy Fazbear himself is standing at his window at night and staring in at him, hoping to kill him in the same way that he killed Michael. Now don't get it twisted, these are all the manic thoughts of a person who is under so much stress regarding the failing business that he just fought and his past trauma that he is just completely breaking from reality. It just also so happens that he might be right on the cash about what's happening, but we'll get to that later. Mr. Patrick becomes convinced that he needs to always have his eyes and ears on the pizzeria in case the animatronics come back, but after several days of staying up for 24 hours straight, he finds out this isn't sustainable. We get a look into one of the days that he spends in the pizzeria, and it's honestly a pretty depressing portion of the novel. His pizza is crap, and only one family comes into the pizzeria during the middle of the summer, which should be like peak hours, and they only end up staying for about 30 minutes because the entire time Mr. Patrick is like paranoid, looking around for vengeful robots. Tired, cranky, and generally upset at the world, Mr. Patrick sees a teenager walk through the front door and angrily asks him what he's doing inside a family restaurant. Not exactly the best ways to get customers for your failing business, but you do you, Mr. Patrick. The teenager tells him that he's looking for a summer job, and Mr. Patrick recognizes the boy. It's Evan. If you remember, Evan is one of the kids from the first book and the only surviving member of his friend group. Knowing that he can't continue staying up all night and working all day, Mr. Patrick decides to hire Evan on as his night caretaker. He notes Evan seems a little too excited about a job sitting inside a stuffy pizzeria overnight with nothing to do, but Mr. Patrick desperately needs the help. Evan asks if he will have to look over the animatronics and names the original 4 from the first book. And Mr. Patrick is intrigued that he seems to know so much about Freddy's. He says those animatronics are gone and the 5 new ones are pretty easy to take care of. Evan will mostly be washing some dishes and doing some janitorial work at night while also looking through some of the old crappy security cameras that are in the place. The end of part 1 is a little strange and abrupt, but it all comes back near the end of the novel. Mr. Patrick shows Evan all of his nightly responsibilities and tells him that he is sorry about his friend's disappearance. Evan tries to shrug this off and says that it's been 5 years since they left and he has moved on for the most part. Mr. Patrick can tell this is a lie. Evan tells him that he's sorry the police ever suspected him and that he hopes the pizzeria can be a success again. And Mr. Patrick says it was never that much of a success in the first place. He leaves Evan for his first night of watching over the pizzeria and heads out the back door. He notices that the back door of the shed out back is open and there is a shovel missing. Mysterious. He also sees more of the footprints, and this sends him back into the paranoia that seemed to be calming down while he talked to Evan. He didn't want to believe it, but it was like he had no other choice. No other option seemed plausible in his head. The metal terror from his childhood was coming back to claim him as its next victim, confirming a truth that he had long held unspoken. It should have been him. Michael's death was his fault. If he hadn't been scared, then they wouldn't have needed to sneak into that place for him to conquer his fear of the mascot suits. The irony was that since Michael had died, Nestor wasn't scared of them at all. He wasn't sure why, but he could never bring himself to be afraid of them for all these years. Now the reason was clear to him. If he had feared them, he would have left Twister. He would have gone somewhere else instead of attending a local high school and coming right back to teach. The absence of fear kept him in place, kept him in Twister long enough for the monster that had once claimed his best friend to claim him as well. And all that fear that should have been there for the past 15 years came roaring back to him like the flood of a burst dam that he should have taken greater care of. But now he couldn't leave. He had no family, no friends, just the shell of the pizzeria that he silently begged would be haunted by the ghost of the only person who ever cared for him. Nestor Patrick went back inside the house. It was dark out, and although he didn't fully trust Evan, he was the best option he had to watch over the pizzeria. He sat down in bed and turned the lamp off. That's when he heard the knock on the door. End of part 1. So the first part of the story really just gives us the setup that we need in order to follow Evan throughout most of the rest of the story. We have this depressing image of a creepy pizzeria that has been bought by Mr. Patrick that is just completely failing in every sense of the word. He can't even get the original animatronics back and is forced to settle with the knockoffs that are so boring that they literally serve no purpose in the plot at all. All of this sets up the mystery of where the original animatronics went in the first place. We know that they are haunted, but we also know that Yellow Bear seems to have them under control. And then Evan comes back into the story and seems pretty stoked to be working at the pizzeria that his friends were last seen at, which is pretty suspicious if you ask me. The knock on the door at the end of part 1 will come back later, but will not be explained for a while, so I hope you weren't expecting an answer to it anytime soon. I do like the sort of delayed gratification angle these books take. It feels like it is trusting the reader to wait for an actual mystery rather than just like getting to it right away. I remember when I was younger, there was a children's horror television program that I really liked called Scary Stories to Watch in the Dark, and each chapter would start with the creator, Alvin Schwartz, telling the viewer about what the scary concept the episode would tackle was going to be. And I always appreciated being warned about the horror beforehand because I was kind of a scaredy dog growing up, but it also made the chapters more suspenseful. So 5.5.2 is giving me a very similar vibe to Scary Stories to Watch in the Dark, which is pretty cool. But that was it for the first part of the novel. Let's move on to the next part. Part 2. 4 Nights with Evan. When Evan was a kid, he had 3 best friends. 6 years ago, those 3 best friends disappeared. Evan hadn't stopped thinking about Henry, David, and William. He also hadn't made any new friends since. Part 2 opens with Evan's first night in the pizzeria, and we also get a whole bunch of exposition dumped on us, which admittedly feels a little bit lazy. Evan has never gotten over the disappearance of his friends, and he does not believe the official story that they were abducted by David's dad. We learn that the police investigated the disappearance, but ultimately decided that they must have been taken by David's dad, and we also learn that the animatronics were never found. In the years since the disappearance, Evan has become convinced that his friends were taken by the Yellow Bear, and this is what led him to apply for the job at Freddy's. He is disappointed to learn that not only are the original animatronics gone from the pizzeria, but Yellow Bear is nowhere to be seen either. This section of the book is broken up into 4 nights, although I would say that the multiple nights format isn't used quite as well as it is in the last book. It kind of feels like it's here out of obligation. The first night sees Evan inspecting the new animatronics, trying to see if he can get them to communicate with him, and this is where he finds out that these animatronics are not the spring-lock suits that the old ones were. He snoops around the pizzeria, remembering the night that he spent there with his friends all those years ago, and he is determined to find some clue as to their disappearance. There is an interesting connection between Mr. Patrick and Evan because both of them have obsessions with Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria that are born from trauma. Evan cannot shake the feeling that his friends were taken from the pizzeria by someone, and he doesn't quite believe that the animatronics are possessed or haunted. Mr. Patrick knows how dangerous the old animatronics were and is open to the possibility that the place is cursed, but this has caused him to form this strange obsession with the brand. Evan uses the keys that Mr. Patrick gave him to investigate the back room, which was the room that Yellow Bear killed the kids in during the first book. He finds that it's mostly been cleared out. He isn't aware that this is where his friends died, but he can feel that there is something the room is trying to tell him. He scours the room and he finds, hidden in the corner, a single circular cracked lens from a pair of glasses that he is positive his friend David used to wear. This convinces Evan that something terrible has happened to his friends and that it must have happened near the pizzeria. He decides that he is going to ask Mr. Patrick about this right away and walks out the back door of the pizzeria towards the house. He pauses after taking a few steps from the building because he can swear that he can hear two voices coming from inside the house, so he sneaks up to the window and peeks inside. Through an opening in the curtains, he can barely see Mr. Patrick talking to another man who appears to be about his age. Everything about the second man seemed off. He was tall, lanky, and his movements felt unnatural. He flailed his arms in what looked like painful contortions when he spoke. Something about the man gave Evan the feeling that he was looking at something that was attempting to mimic what a human acted like, not an actual human itself. But the most peculiar detail about this uncanny man was his choice of headwear. He kept a small, faded rainbow beanie pulled firmly over his scalp. The beanie had clearly been made for a child, but it looked glued onto the man's head, like it had become part of him. So from that description, we can deduce that this is Michael, who has come back to see his good friend Nestor, the kid that left him for dead all those years ago in the pizzeria. Evan can tell that Michael is clearly upset with Mr. Patrick by the way that he is yelling at him, so he retreats back to the pizzeria, creeped out by what he's seen. This ends Evan's first night at the pizzeria. At this point, he has seen Michael but has no idea who he is, and he has also found the lens from David's glasses. The next tiny day portion of the novel covers stuff that we've already talked about. Evan finds out that the pizzeria closed for financial reasons and not for any strange accident. This does clue us into the idea that Michael's body was never recovered from the restaurant, meaning that he most likely survived and has come back all these years later. Now you might be saying, how on earth did a kid get his head crushed and manage to survive all those years on his own? Don't worry, we will cover that by the end of the novel. But moving on to our next night at the pizzeria, Evan falls asleep while he is supposed to be watching the cameras and wakes up to the sound of a noise behind the building. He goes outside to see someone has seemingly removed a shovel from the shed. It's very similar to what Mr. Patrick noticed earlier on in the novel. Looking towards the forest, Evan thinks he sees something walking through the trees. He remarks that even though he can barely see it, he is sure that it is Yellow Bear. Knowing that Yellow Bear has some connection to his friend's disappearance, he decides to run into the woods after him. I really like the imagery of this kid searching after this almost cryptid-like figure in the woods. It reminded me a lot of my friends and I going on huge hand hunting trips when we were little. But honestly, could you blame us? The state of Colombia is pretty much known only for its huge hand sightings. Back to the story, Evan runs into the woods but is unable to see the bear. He doesn't have a flashlight or a lantern or any light source on him, so he gets turned around really quickly. As he is stumbling through the forest, he sees a beam from a flashlight, and it turns out it's Mr. Patrick. He sees Evan, who has stumbled at this point, and immediately pulls him up off the ground, and they head back to the pizzeria. Evan is expecting Mr. Patrick to be furious with him, but he actually looks incredibly shaken up and is mostly quiet as he escorts him back to the pizzeria. As the two of them clear the tree line, Evan swears he can see the sound of one of the original animatronics coming from the woods. Shockingly, Mr. Patrick isn't upset with Evan, he just looks incredibly pale and shaken up. Evan says he looks like he's just seen a ghost, which is maybe a little bit on the nose, but that is where our second night at Freddy's ends. The next day sees Evan exploring the woods behind the pizzeria and finding an old stone building. It kind of is described as almost like a cottage or a little house. All of the windows have been boarded up, and he tries to open the door but finds that it is locked, and he thinks that this must have been where Mr. Patrick was the night before. The third night of the story covers a lot of stuff that I already talked about at the beginning of the novel. Mr. Patrick shows up to the pizzeria and talks to Evan about his past. He reveals that he was there when Michael was chomped by the animatronic, but that they never recovered his body. It's during this conversation that Evan comes clean to Mr. Patrick about his reason for wanting to work at the pizzeria. He tells him that he thinks his friend's disappearances had something to do with the restaurant, and Mr. Patrick tells him that he might be onto something. He says that he also lost a friend all those years ago in 1983, but that there is something special about the pizzeria because his friend came back. He says that Michael returned to him a couple nights ago and that Evan's friends might come back someday as well, so Evan should just be patient. Through this, we can surmise that the man that Evan saw in the window, the creepy lanky man, was in fact Michael. Evan confesses that he saw Michael and Mr. Patrick in the window 2 nights ago and asks why Michael was yelling at him. Mr. Patrick explains that Michael was frustrated with him for leaving him when he was bitten back then and that he still holds this grudge against him for this. Evan starts to question the reality of Michael returning. He asks how he could have survived his own head being crushed, and Mr. Patrick says that he doesn't want to talk about it. He says that Michael still wears his old beanie to hide the scars on his head, and Evan asks if he has seen the scars himself, and this causes Mr. Patrick to get very upset. It's at this point that we can tell that Mr. Patrick seems to be losing it a little bit. He starts yelling at Evan and saying that he and Michael are going to make the pizzeria popular again. Evan starts yelling back and tells him that he can't hope to attract customers with his lame off-brand animatronics, and that's when Mr. Patrick lets something slip. He tells Evan that we found one, a real one. He says that Michael showed him one of the original animatronics and that they are working on restoring it and bringing it back to the restaurant. So we can assume that this is what he saw the night before out in the woods, and it appears that there was at least one animatronic in that little stone cottage. But at this point, this entire conversation has gotten Mr. Patrick incredibly upset, so he fires Evan for insubordination, and Evan leaves the pizzeria incredibly frustrated. So this third night is definitely a more lore dump night in terms of the story. I'd say that overall this novel is a lot more messy than the first one, but while the plot is a little more scattered and the structure is kind of all over the place, I do think this book delivers on some of the more adult aspects of this series, because the next 2 nights and the de facto climax of the novel have some of the most extreme horror that we have seen so far. Definitely not appropriate for children if you ask me. Night 4 is interesting and maybe a little bit of a cop-out because it doesn't actually take place at Freddy's. Instead, Mr. Patrick shows up at Evan's house and gives him a box of his personal belongings. Mr. Patrick explains that this is all the junk that Evan left at the pizzeria, but Evan is confused. He says that he didn't leave anything there except for his jacket. Mr. Patrick says that he doesn't have time to worry about this and leaves Evan to go through his belongings. Inside the box, Evan finds his jacket, some other random items, and perhaps most interestingly, a tape recorder with a tape already inside of it. He hits play on the tape recorder and hears the hushed voice of Mr. Patrick. Hello? I haven't used this stupid thing in forever. I don't have much time to record this before he comes back, so I'll try to make this quick. To start off, the man who is currently living with me isn't Michael. He is someone else, someone who has caused a great deal of harm. He was there the night Michael had the accident, and he was there when your friends went missing. He always seems to be there when these things happen. He always comes back. I'm telling you this because I know what happened to your friends all those years ago. I know you won't believe me, you probably think I'm crazy, but I need to tell you his story. I need to tell you the story of the man dressed in the yellow bear costume. And with that, we have the end of the second part of the novel. We get the twist reveal that the creepy lanky guy isn't Michael, but rather the yellow bear serial killer from the first novel. And I don't know if it was planned, but the first novel doesn't really give us any indication of what the killer actually looks like when David sees him at the end of the book. So the twist being that the killer and the fake Michael are the same person actually works here, but if they ever tried to make a movie out of this, I don't know how you would do that. But the last portion of this novel is my favorite part. Like I said, it's where things start to get more intense and brutal and definitely would have scarred some young children. Part 3, The Stranger in the Window. The next part of the story begins back in the pizzeria in 1983. We have a teenage boy that is skulking around the outside of the building. We learn that this unnamed boy has been kicked out of Freddy's and has been banned from the establishment due to tampering with the animatronics in the past. The boy is strange, lanky, and talks in a quiet, giggly voice, but is also prone to extreme fits of anger where he yells at anyone who has made him upset. All of this has led to his expulsion from Freddy Fazbear's, and he is routinely chased away from the restaurant and forced to retreat back into the woods behind it. We learn that the dilapidated stone cottage that Evan found earlier used to be this guy's house. He lived there with his older brother, who was in jail during the events of this story. This has left the boy to live inside this creepy cottage all by himself. We find that he sets little traps in the woods outside of his house to catch animals, which he then tortures. He is certainly showing all the hallmarks of being an aspiring serial killer, but he also shows promise in another area of expertise. He is an aspiring animatronic creator. In the basement of his house, he has a makeshift animatronic that he has been working on for a long time. When he was tampering with the animatronics in Freddy's, he was actually trying to steal parts from them to put into his own creation. We see that he actually has some talent, as the animatronic that he is working on, a yellow-furred variant of Bonnie, appears to be somewhat functional. Even more impressive is that this Bonnie animatronic includes the spring lock system that the other animatronics use. If you remember, that means you can insert a crank into the back of the suit that you can then turn to move all of the animatronic parts to the outside of the animatronic. This allows someone to wear the suit and use it as a costume, even though the lanky guy, who the book simply refers to as the Stranger, has already made himself a costume to wear. It is here that we see that the Stranger had already made the Yellow Bear costume all those years ago that he uses in the present day to lure kids to their deaths. He has pretty much completed his spring Bonnie suit, but there's still one major issue. He is simply too afraid to get inside and test it out. And honestly, for as crazy and evil and messed up as the Stranger is, this makes a ton of sense to me. Those springlock suits are absolute death traps, and I wouldn't wear one either. He is unsure what to do about testing the suit when one night he hears two boys running through the woods towards the pizzeria. It's Nestor and Michael. He starts to think that he could lure them to his cottage in order to try to get them to try the suit on, since they seem to be fans of the pizzeria, so he follows them. The Stranger is watching through the window as the boys enter the pizzeria, and he sees Michael get chomped by the Freddy animatronic. He also sees Nestor abandon him, and it is here where we find out what happened to Michael's body. The Stranger took it back to his house in the woods. But it turns out that Michael didn't actually die all the way when he was first chomped. It is amazing what the brain can do without the frontal lobe. He managed to barely cling on to life and regains consciousness a little while later. Unfortunately for Michael, he regains consciousness having already been forced inside of the springlock Bonnie suit that the Stranger has made. What comes next is honestly the part of the novel that I find to be the most disturbing, even if most people seem to think that it's only like the second most disturbing part of the novel. The Stranger sees that Michael is able to fit inside the suit and deems that his prototype is a success, but he wants to make sure the spring locks are able to stay in place. He starts pushing on the animatronic and jostling it, with Michael falling in and out of consciousness, unable to do anything to resist. Surprisingly, the suit stays in place and the spring locks hold strong. This satisfies the Stranger's curiosity, but then we see his sadistic side come back into focus. We need to remember that in the current day storyline, the Stranger is a serial killer who preys on children. He is heartless and cruel, and although he seems to be a talented inventor, he is first and foremost a monster who enjoys torturing animals and killing people. What comes next is the Stranger's first kill. He takes the crank for his makeshift springlock suit and inserts it into the back of the animatronic with Michael still inside. In the first novel, we witnessed David's older brother Gregory suffer from a springlock failure in which the mechanical parts violently and suddenly snapped back into place and skewered him to death. I was expecting Five Nights at Freddy's 2 to repeat the same gruesome fate, but somehow it's so much worse in this book. Instead of the parts violently and suddenly shifting back into place, the Stranger slowly turns the crank and the mechanical parts lazily and slowly move themselves back to the center of the animatronic. This means that Michael is slowly and agonizingly pierced by the mechanical parts. The book describes him as convulsing back and forth at one point, just like shaking and shaking as this is all happening to him. Eventually, Michael stops moving and the Stranger is thrilled about this. He has committed his first murder, but we know that it certainly wasn't his last. We learn that the Stranger seems to have lived in that little house in the woods for years at this point, that he came back to torment Mr. Patrick when he realized who he was. The night before Mr. Patrick gave the tape to Evan, he discovered the house in the woods and found the Stranger there along with the old, withered animatronics. He confronted the Stranger about hiding the animatronics from him, and the two got in a scuffle where he tore off Michael's hat and saw that his head seemed to be fine. Realizing that he wasn't dealing with his old friend, but with a presumably dangerous person, he ran back out of the woods and found Evan escorting him back to the pizzeria. After firing Evan to keep him away from the Stranger, Mr. Patrick returns to the house where he decides to take a look at the crawl space. He had realized that the house was oddly well taken care of when he moved in, and surmises that the Stranger must have been staying there the entire time. In the crawl space, he finds a trove of the Stranger's things, including land wheelwright photographs of the original murder victims from the first book. He also finds photographs of the original animatronics and is horrified to realize that the Stranger must have stuffed the kids into them. Mr. Patrick ends the tape recording by stating that he is sorry that he was ever rude to Evan and his friends, and that he plans on making it up to them now. He tells them that he will be going to the police immediately after he closes up the pizzeria for the night, but is worried they won't believe him. He tells Evan to expect the police to show up at his house the next day, since they will certainly have some questions for him. Completely shocked by what he has heard and not necessarily believing any of it, Evan decides to just wait and see if the police show up the next day. Of course, the police never show up, and Evan ends up waiting until nighttime to do anything. The infamous fifth night at Freddy's. Evan decides that he needs to confirm Mr. Patrick's story for himself, so he's going to head to the forest and enter the creepy murder house. He thinks if he can see that the animatronics are there and maybe talk to Mr. Patrick in person, then he can feel confident knowing that his friends are really gone. He heads to the forest but brings a baseball bat with him to protect himself. He doesn't quite understand the gravity of the situation yet. At the end of the day, he is a teenage kid and he thinks that a baseball bat is all he needs to defend himself against a serial killer. He walks into the woods and eventually finds the house, but it turns out he doesn't need the key because the door is wide open. While he is a little ways off from the house, he sees something in the door. It's the glowing eyes of an animatronic. He's freaked out at first, but then recognizes the animatronic as Freddy and realizes that Mr. Patrick must have been telling the truth. Evan runs towards the house, enters the door, and is immediately clubbed over the head by the stranger who has been waiting for him, and he passes out. When he wakes up, he finds himself in one of the most nightmarish situations I could imagine. He is confused, disoriented, and appears to be wearing some kind of costume that the stranger has put him in. He realizes that he's inside the yellow bear costume, and Evan tries to immediately take it off, but as he tries to do this, pain starts shooting through his body. He realizes that certain parts of the skin on his body have been sewn into the lining of the suit, and he is unable to take it off. This is the part of the novel that people typically refer to as the most disturbing part, and I can definitely see why. I've said before that I really like children's horror, and I feel that it has an important place in our media landscape, but I get why parents were upset with this. We have gone so far beyond what you would typically find in a kid's book. Our main character has had his skin sewn into a costume by a serial killer. But back to the story, realizing that he is unable to free himself from the suit, Evan starts panicking. He can barely see, it's completely dark in the room that he's in because it's still nighttime, but he starts to try to make his way to the door to hopefully escape. While he is fumbling his way towards the exit, he trips over something, and when his eyes finally adjust to the darkness, he sees that he is looking at the dead body of Mr. Patrick. He appears to have been stabbed by the stranger, and his body is laying next to the ruined remains of the Spring Bonnie animatronic from all those years ago. Mr. Patrick, in his last moments, was most likely trying to recover his best friend's remains that were still present inside of the animatronic, however pointless that endeavor may have been. And although it doesn't mean much to Evan, he can't help but shudder when he sees that grasped in Mr. Patrick's right hand is the rainbow beanie that his best friend used to wear. This really is an absolutely brutal end to Mr. Patrick's story. He lived a very confused life with a lot of regret and sadness, and then he finally owned the Freddy Fazbear's restaurant, and he was murdered soon after. While trying to make sense of all this, Evan hears a sound coming from the basement. He hears the familiar song that plays from Freddy Fazbear's voice box. Having realized that the front door is locked and that he has no other means of escape, Evan, now forcibly dressed up as Yellow Bear, descends into the basement. Inside the basement, he finds the 4 original animatronics now fallen into disrepair, and as soon as they see him, they start shaking. These bizarre convulsions cause Evan to realize that they are in fact possessed by the spirits of his friends, and he starts to call out to each of them by name. As he does this, they all stop shaking momentarily. It seems that they have maybe recognized his voice, but this doesn't last long. While the spirits may have recognized Evan's voice as being the voice of their friend, they more readily recognize the costume that Evan is sewn into as what their murderer wore. The animatronics start to advance on Evan, moving towards him slowly. Evan isn't sure what to do or what to expect, but he hopes that his friends have at least recognized him. Unfortunately for Evan, he's wrong. The spirits, who are full of rage at this point, descend on Evan. And the book ends with Evan being killed by the spirit of his friends for the crime of wearing the Yellow Bear costume. So at the end of all of this, the stranger gets away again. In the first book, he kills 3 children and is never caught, and in this book, he kills Mr. Patrick and facilitates the death of Evan. It is heavily implied that he knew that Evan would be killed by the animatronics, and that's why he sewed him into the suit. I like to think he was treating this as a sort of test run. He wanted to see if the animatronics would be hostile towards anyone wearing the Yellow Bear costume. Turns out they are. There are certainly a lot of questions that need to be answered though, like how is the stranger seemingly able to wrangle these massive animatronics? There was also the loose thread of the shovel being stolen from the shed behind the pizzeria. We're never really told what that was about. It doesn't seem like the stranger needed a shovel for anything, so it was probably stolen by someone else. I guess we'll have to see if that shows up in any of the later books. There are also some other smaller plot details that I glossed over because they didn't seem that important, but maybe they will be later on. For instance, Mr. Patrick has toys of all the animatronics, and his toy Chica is missing its beak, and it's specifically pointed out, but I'm not sure why that would even be important. But sometimes it's good to have a story that introduces a lot of confusing elements in order to disorient the reader. Not every story has to be straightforward. If you're looking for just a good, straightforward MeTube horror series, then I would highly recommend checking out Petscop. It's a horror series that is honestly very refreshing in how clearly it lays out its mystery. Sometimes it's just nice to have an internet horror series where everyone can just agree on what it actually means. But you'll have to let me know what you guys think about Five Nights at Freddy's 2. Do you remember reading this? Did it mess you up? Do you think this story is too convoluted? Make sure to leave all that in the reply section up above, and if you liked this video, then please give me a 5-star rating. That really does help my page out a lot. And again, remember to follow my MeTube page. I'm trying to reach 200,000 followers by the end of 2026. And yeah, thanks again to everybody for watching this video, and I'll see you in the next one. Catch you later. Send me down again to the ocean floor. Is there something more? 'Cause I've run out of luck here on the surface. I'm feeling worthless. 365 days are gone, still this memory strong. But I could wash it down with the ocean air. You're cool blue and crystal clear. And I'm 20,000 leagues below, running away from home, traveling alone, brave enough to see the sea, but too scared to say hello. And I know one day I'll be gold,